Let me speak to you today the way I would speak to a patient sitting across from me in my office, someone I have known for years, someone whose hands I have held while delivering both good news and hard news. Because what I want to tell you today is not just medical information. It is something closer to the truth of what I have seen over and over in more than 3 decades of practicing medicine and watching human beings age. And here is the truth, plain and simple. If you are between 75 and 85 years old and you are still doing 6 particular things that seem small, things that seem almost too ordinary to matter, then you are not just aging well. You are, in the truest sense of the word, one of a kind. You are rarer than you think. And I want to walk you through exactly what these 6 things are, why they matter so much more than any pill I could ever prescribe, and why, if you recognize yourself in what I am about to say, you should feel a quiet, deep pride settle into your chest. I have sat with thousands of patients over the years. I have watched some decline rapidly in their 60s, frail and defeated by 70, while others, remarkably, walk into my office at 82 with more vitality in their eyes than people half their age. And for the longest time, I assumed this was simply genetics, luck of the draw, the roll of some biological dice none of us control. But the longer I practiced, the more I paid attention, the more I realized something different. The people who were thriving in their late 70s and 80s were not necessarily the ones with the best genes. They were the ones who had, consciously or unconsciously, held onto certain habits, certain behaviors, certain ways of engaging with life that most people quietly let go of somewhere around retirement. And it is these 6 things I want to share with you now, not as a doctor lecturing from behind a desk, but as someone who has genuinely, humbly, been moved by what I have witnessed in my patients. Before I begin, let me say this. If you find yourself nodding along as I describe these 6 things, if you feel that little spark of recognition, please stay with me until the end. Because I am going to explain not just what these things are, but why they work, what is actually happening in your brain and your body when you do them, and why so many people stop doing them without even realizing the cost. This is not going to be a quick list. This is going to be a real conversation, the kind I wish I could have with every single patient who walks through my door, but simply do not have the time for in a 15-minute appointment. So settle in, let us talk. The first thing I want to talk about is movement, but not in the way you might expect. I am not talking about running marathons or lifting heavy weights. I am talking about the simple, stubborn refusal to sit still for long periods of time. I have a patient, a woman named Eleanor, who at 81 years old still walks to her local market every single morning, rain or shine, because she refuses to let her son deliver her groceries. It is not about the groceries. It is about the walk. It is about placing one foot in front of the other, day after day, decade after decade, because somewhere along the way she decided that movement was not optional. And here is what fascinates me as a physician. When we study the bodies of people who remain mobile and active into their 80s, we see something remarkable happening at the cellular level. Their muscles retain what we call mitochondrial density, essentially the energy factories inside each cell, at levels far higher than their sedentary peers. Their bone density, which naturally declines with age, declines far more slowly. Their cardiovascular systems remain more elastic, more responsive. But beyond the biology, there is something else happening, something psychological. When you move your body every day, even gently, even slowly, you are sending a message to your own nervous system that says, I am still capable. I am still here. I am still a person who does things, and not a person things are done to. And that message matters more than any statistic I could quote you. Because so many of my patients who decline rapidly, who end up in wheelchairs far earlier than their bodies actually required, did so not because their bodies failed them first, but because their minds gave up the belief that movement was still their job. They handed that responsibility over to caregivers, to family members, to convenience, and their bodies simply followed the lead their minds had already set. So if you are still walking every day, still gardening, still climbing your stairs instead of avoiding them, still choosing to stand when you could sit, I want you to know that this single habit alone is doing more for your longevity than almost anything else in your life. It is rewiring your brain's relationship to your own capability. It is preserving not just your muscles but your identity as someone who is still, fundamentally, alive and active in the world. The second thing, and this one surprises people, is curiosity. Real, genuine, stubborn curiosity about the world. I think of a patient named Harold, 84 years old, who spent his entire career as an accountant, a man who by his own admission never read a novel until he retired. And yet when I see him now, he is telling me about a documentary on deep sea creatures, or a book he just finished about ancient Rome, or a new recipe he tried because he saw it mentioned somewhere and wanted to understand the chemistry of why it worked. Harold's brain, when we look at cognitive testing, functions more like a man 15 years younger. And this is not a coincidence. When neuroscientists study what they call cognitive reserve, essentially the brain's ability to withstand age-related changes without showing symptoms of decline, they find that the single strongest predictor is not crossword puzzles, not brain training apps, not any of the things marketed to us as cognitive supplements. It is genuine sustained curiosity. It is the habit of asking why. It is the refusal to believe you have already learned everything worth learning. Because here is what happens in the brain of someone who stays curious. Every time you learn something new, whether it is a language, a skill, a piece of trivia, a new way of thinking about something familiar, you are literally building new neural pathways. You are forcing your brain to form new connections between neurons, and these connections act like backup roads. When age-related changes start to affect certain pathways, and they inevitably do in all of us, a brain with more backup roads, more alternate routes, simply compensates better. It finds another way to get the message through. But there is something even deeper here than neuroscience. Curiosity keeps you oriented toward the future. It keeps you asking what is next, what else is out there, what haven't I discovered yet? And that orientation toward the future, that sense that life still holds surprises worth uncovering, is fundamentally different from the orientation of someone who believes their story has already been fully written. So if you are still curious, if you still ask questions, if you still want to understand how things work or why things happen, you are protecting your mind in a way that no supplement, no medication, no clinical intervention could ever replicate. The third thing is something I have come to believe is perhaps the most underrated protective factor in all of medicine, and that is genuine social connection. Not just having people around you, but actively investing in relationships, actively reaching out, actively showing up for others. I think of a woman named Dorothy, 80 years old, widowed for over a decade, who still hosts a weekly card game with 3 other women from her neighborhood, a tradition that has continued for over 30 years. She calls her grandchildren regularly, not out of obligation, but out of genuine interest in their lives. She writes letters, actual handwritten letters, to friends who have moved away. And when I look at Dorothy's health markers, her inflammatory markers, her blood pressure, her overall physiological stress response, they are remarkably lower than what we would expect for someone of her age and history. This is not a coincidence either. There is now overwhelming research showing that loneliness is not simply an emotional state, it is a physiological one. Chronic loneliness triggers the same stress response pathways as physical danger. It elevates cortisol. It increases systemic inflammation. It has been shown, in study after study, to increase mortality risk at a rate comparable to smoking or obesity. Let that sink in for a moment. The absence of meaningful connection can be as dangerous to your body as a pack of cigarettes a day. But the reverse is also true. Genuine, warm, reciprocal social connection acts as a buffer against nearly every major disease process we study, from cardiovascular disease to cognitive decline to depression. And here is what I find most beautiful about this. It is not about how many people you know. It is not about the size of your social circle. It is about the depth and authenticity of the connections you maintain. Someone with 3 deep, honest, mutually caring relationships will fare better than someone with 50 superficial acquaintances. So if you are still calling your friends, still showing up for family gatherings, still making the effort to maintain relationships, even when it would be easier to withdraw, even when grief has taken people from your life, and it would be understandable to close yourself off, you are engaging in one of the most powerful medical interventions available to any human being, and you are doing it for free, simply by choosing to remain open to love and connection. The fourth thing I want to discuss is something that might seem almost too simple to mention, and that is the habit of preparing and eating real food, cooked with your own hands, rather than relying entirely on prepared, processed, or delivered meals. I think of a man named Samuel, 83, who still makes his own bread every week, who still goes to the farmer's market on Saturdays to select his own vegetables, who takes genuine pleasure in the process of cooking, not just the consuming. And when I look at Samuel's metabolic health, his blood sugar regulation, his lipid profile, they tell a story of someone whose body has been consistently nourished rather than merely fed. Now, I want to be careful here, because I am not suggesting that anyone who relies on convenience foods due to physical limitations or circumstances is doing something wrong. That is not the point I am making. The point is about the underlying engagement with food as something you actively participate in, rather than something that simply happens to you. When you cook your own meals, even simple ones, you are far more attuned to what you are actually consuming. You notice the salt, the sugar, the quality of ingredients, in a way that becomes nearly invisible when food arrives pre-made and packaged. But there is more to it than nutrition. The act of cooking itself, the planning, the chopping, the timing, the sensory engagement with smell and texture and taste, is a form of active cognitive and physical engagement that keeps multiple systems in your body and brain working together in coordination. It is, in a sense, a daily rehearsal of competence, a repeated proof to yourself that you can still plan, execute, and complete a meaningful task with your own two hands. And there is a deeper layer still, because sharing food, cooking for others, inviting people to your table, ties directly back into that social connection I just described. Meals shared with others carry a kind of nourishment that goes beyond calories. So if you are still cooking, still shopping thoughtfully for your ingredients, still finding pleasure in the process of nourishing yourself and the people you love, you are engaging in one of the oldest and most powerful acts of self-care that human beings have ever practiced. The fifth thing, and this is one I have grown increasingly passionate about the longer I practice medicine, is the maintenance of purpose. Not necessarily a grand purpose. Not something that needs to be written about in a biography, but a genuine reason to get out of bed each morning that has nothing to do with simply passing time until the day ends. I think of a man named Robert, 79 years old, a retired carpenter, who now spends several mornings a week building small wooden toys that he donates to a children's hospital. Nobody asked him to do this. He decided on his own that his hands still had something to give, and he found a way to give it. And Robert, when I examine him, has the vitality of someone who wakes up each day knowing that his existence matters to someone beyond himself. Purpose, as researchers who study human flourishing have found, is one of the strongest predictors of longevity across cultures and populations. In the regions of the world where people live the longest, healthiest lives, researchers have identified a concept that in Japanese culture is called having a reason for being, a reason to wake up in the morning. It is not about achievement in the traditional sense. It is about mattering, about contribution, about the sense that your presence in the world creates some kind of ripple, however small. And here is what happens physiologically when purpose is present. Studies have shown that individuals with a strong sense of purpose have lower rates of cardiovascular events, lower rates of cognitive decline, and remarkably, lower mortality rates overall, even when controlling for other health factors. Purpose seems to act almost like a protective shield around the body, perhaps because it reduces the kind of chronic stress that comes from feeling irrelevant or forgotten. Perhaps because it motivates people to take better care of themselves simply because they feel their continued presence matters. Whatever the mechanism, the effect is undeniable. So if you are still volunteering, still mentoring, still creating, still contributing in whatever way feels meaningful to you, whether that is caring for grandchildren, tending a garden that feeds neighbors, or simply being the person your community turns to for wisdom and advice, you are protecting your health in a way that goes far beyond anything found in a prescription bottle. The sixth and final thing I want to share with you is perhaps the hardest to quantify scientifically, but the one I have come to believe matters more than almost anything else, and that is the maintenance of humor and a fundamentally optimistic disposition toward life. Even in the face of loss, pain, and the undeniable realities of aging, I think of a woman named Margaret, 85 years old, who has buried a husband, a sister, and two close friends in the past decade, who lives with chronic arthritis that causes her genuine daily discomfort, and who still, somehow, greets every single one of my questions with a joke, a light comment, a genuine smile that reaches her eyes. Margaret has not denied her grief. She has not pretended her pain does not exist. But she has cultivated, deliberately and consciously, the ability to hold both the hardship and the humor at the same time. And when researchers study what they call dispositional optimism, the tendency to expect good outcomes and interpret setbacks as temporary rather than permanent, they find it correlated with significantly reduced rates of cardiovascular disease, stronger immune function, and yes, longer lifespan overall. There is a fascinating body of research showing that optimists, on average, live measurably longer than pessimists, even when controlling for socioeconomic status, existing health conditions, and lifestyle factors. The mechanisms are still being studied, but the leading theories suggest that optimism reduces the chronic activation of stress hormones, improves adherence to healthy behaviors because optimists believe their efforts will pay off, and strengthens social bonds because people are naturally drawn toward those who bring lightness rather than heaviness into a room. But beyond the science, I think there is something almost spiritual about maintaining humor in the face of life's hardest realities. It is a kind of quiet defiance. It says, yes, life has taken things from me. Yes, my body does not work the way it once did. Yes, I have said goodbye to people I loved deeply, and still, I choose to find something to laugh about today. That choice, repeated daily, becomes a way of life, and it protects not just the person who holds it, but everyone lucky enough to be in their presence. So there you have it. Movement that refuses to stop, curiosity that refuses to fade, connection that refuses to isolate, nourishment that refuses to become mindless, purpose that refuses to disappear, and humor that refuses to surrender, even to grief, even to pain, even to the undeniable weight of years accumulated. If you recognize yourself in even 3 or 4 of these 6 things, I want you to understand something important. You are not simply lucky. You are not simply the beneficiary of good genetics, though genetics certainly play some role in all of our lives. You have, in ways both conscious and unconscious, been actively choosing life day after day in the smallest and largest ways possible. And that is a remarkable thing. It is, genuinely, in the truest sense of the phrase, one of a kind because so many people, somewhere along the way, quietly let go of one or more of these habits. They stop moving because it feels easier to sit. They stop learning because they believe there is nothing left to discover. They withdraw from relationships because grief or fear makes connection feel risky. They stop cooking because convenience feels simpler. They lose their sense of purpose because retirement or loss leaves them without a clear role. And they lose their humor because the accumulated weight of loss makes lightness feel almost disrespectful to what they have been through. But you, if you are still holding on to these 6 things, even imperfectly, even on the hard days when it would be easier not to, you are demonstrating something that I, as a physician, find genuinely inspiring. You are demonstrating that aging does not have to mean diminishment. You are demonstrating that the body and mind, given the right daily inputs, can remain remarkably resilient far longer than most of us are led to believe. And I want you to carry that knowledge with you, not as a source of pressure, not as one more thing to worry about getting right, but as a source of genuine pride. Because you have earned it. Every walk you took when you could have stayed on the couch. Every book you read when you could have simply watched television. Every phone call you made when it would have been easier to let the silence stretch on. Every meal you cooked when takeout would have been simpler. Every small act of purpose you pursued when you could have simply rested. Every joke you cracked when the world gave you every reason to feel only sorrow. All of it, every single one of these choices, has added up to the person sitting here today, still vital, still engaged, still, in every meaningful sense of the word, truly alive. I want to leave you with one final thought before I close. None of this requires perfection. I am not asking you to walk 10,000 steps a day, or read a book a week, or maintain a bustling social calendar. What I am describing are orientations, tendencies, Directions you lean toward rather than rigid requirements you must fulfill. Some days you will not feel like moving, and that is human. Some weeks you will feel disconnected from friends, and that too is human. What matters is the overall direction of your life, the general pull toward engagement rather than withdrawal, toward curiosity rather than resignation, toward connection rather than isolation. If that is the pattern of your life, even with all its natural fluctuations, you are doing something remarkable, something that deserves to be recognized and celebrated. And if you are watching this and you recognize a parent, a grandparent, a neighbor, a friend who embodies these 6 things, I want you to do something for me. Reach out to them today. Tell them what you see in them. Tell them that their vitality, their curiosity, their warmth, their humor has not gone unnoticed. Because sometimes the people who are aging most beautifully do not even realize how rare and remarkable what they are doing truly is. They simply think they are living their lives the only way they know how, and it takes someone else, someone who loves them, to reflect back to them just how extraordinary their ordinary daily choices really are. Thank you so much for spending this time with me today. If what I have shared resonated with you, if you saw yourself or someone you love in these 6 things, I would be so grateful if you would hit that subscribe button so we can continue these conversations together. And please, leave a comment below and let me know which of these 6 things resonates most with you or with someone in your life. I rate every single comment, and I would love to hear your stories. Until next time, take care of yourselves, keep moving, keep learning, keep connecting, keep nourishing yourselves, keep finding your purpose, and never, ever stop laughing. I will see you in the next one.